Close your eyes. Picture a world map not as it is today, but as it was just 100 years ago. Stretches of red ink blanket the globe. Canada, India, Australia, South Africa, Egypt, the Caribbean, and countless islands scattered across every ocean. That red represented the British Empire, so vast, so sprawling, that the sun never set upon it. But this was no accident of geography. It was a product of ambition, trade, war, and often brutal conquest. It began not with royal decree, but with adventurous merchants and pirates chasing profit and glory beyond the edge of maps. Over centuries, Britain would rise from a squabbling island kingdom to the greatest imperial force the world had ever seen, reshaping continents, cultures, and the future itself. And yet this story is not just about emperors and admirals. It is about enslaved laborers on Caribbean plantations, sepoys in the heat of rebellion, missionaries in unfamiliar jungles, London bankers, Indian rebels, Irish revolutionaries, and Zulu kings tonight. We'll trace the arc of this mighty and deeply complicated empire from its first uncertain voyages to its lingering shadow. WS in Our Modern World. Segment 1. Islands of Ambition, the Seeds of Empire 1497 to 1707. As you drift into sleep, let the quiet tides of time carry you through the rise, reach, and reverberations of the British Empire. English efforts to claim land are erratic. Drake famously circumnavigates the globe. Raiding wherever he sails, Elizabeth I praises him as a hero. Spain sees him as a criminal. Spain sends its mighty armada to crush the English upstarts. But storm and strategy scatter the fleet. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, none of these grow in England, but they can be cultivated abroad. And so, colonization becomes commerce. England survives, but with its own ships, its own flags, and soon its own soldiers. But over time, the company learns to play local politics, fund puppet rulers, and influence regional wars. The seeds of Britain's rule in India are quietly taking root. Protestantism survives, and the idea takes root. Perhaps this island nation can compete on the world stage after all. And one of its most profitable and darkest pillars is the Atlantic slave trade. It is harsh, deadly, and nearly fails, but it survives, thanks in part to the cultivation of tobacco. Colonists don't come for a charity. These are traded on the African coast for human lives. Shackled men, women, and children are transported across the Middle Passage to plantations in the Caribbean and Americas. There, they labor under brutal conditions, producing sugar and tobacco that flow back to Europe. They come for land and profit. The failed Roanoke colony in the 1580s vanishes into legend. But other tools prove more effective: piracy, for instance. But the human cost is catastrophic. Millions of Africans torn from their homes, families shattered, cultures destroyed. But on the fringes of this Renaissance explosion sits England, a fractured, war-torn island emerging from decades of civil war, the Wars of the Roses. An Italian navigator, John Cabot, sets sail westward from Bristol. He reaches the coast of what we now call Newfoundland, planting the first English flag in the New World. But unlike Spain's gold-rich conquests, Cabot finds only cold seas and cod. There, sugar becomes king, but only because of another import: enslaved Africans. Part 1. A Kingdom on the Edge. The year is 1497. Europe is changing. Spain and Portugal are dispatching ships across vast oceans, claiming continents in the name of Christ and gold. It is here, in the reign of the first Tudor King Henry VII, that a quiet but fateful voyage is launched. Still, the seed is planted. Part 2. Pirates, prayer, and profit. Over the next century, England's ambitions grow not through grand design, but through desperation and competition. Spain and Portugal dominate the seas. Privateers like Francis Drake are licensed pirates, plundering Spanish treasure fleets by 1588. The two nations clash in earnest. Trade becomes the driving force. Part 3. The birth of a corporate empire. In 1600, a charter is signed that will reshape history. The Honorable East India Company is born. Not a government, not an army, just a company, at first. The company's ambitions are modest, trading spices and textiles with Indian merchants. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a new settlement is founded. Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607, in the Caribbean. England seizes islands like Barbados and Jamaica. Part 4. The slave trade and the triangular web. By the mid-1600s, the British Empire is not yet vast, but its bones are forming. English ships leave ports like Liverpool and Bristol filled with manufactured goods. This triangle, goods, slaves, products, becomes the economic engine of empire. The profits fund banks, universities, and great estates back in Britain. Slavery becomes so essential to British prosperity that it will take more than 200 years to even begin to undo its damage. Part 5. Civil War and commercial control. Back home, the 1600s are turbulent. England plunges into civil war. King Charles I is executed for a time. The country becomes a republic under Oliver Cromwell. He seizes Jamaica from the Spanish in 1655 and enforces the Navigation Acts laws that force colonies to trade only with England. And though Cromwell's rule is brief, it marks a significant moment for the empire. Colonies are expected to produce raw materials and import British goods, a system designed to keep wealth flowing back to London. Cromwell is a fervent Protestant and deeply committed to expanding English influence abroad. The idea that the empire exists to serve the mother country begins to harden. As the 1600s draw to a close, a new player seeks a slice of empire: Scotland. Even after the monarchy is restored, this idea sticks. Trade becomes tightly controlled. Part 6. Scotland's Gamble and Union in 1698. The Darien Scheme is launched, Scotland's attempt to establish a colony in the Isthmus of Panama. It is a disaster. Disease, poor planning, and Spanish resistance doom the venture. The failure bankrupts much of Scotland's elite. The fallout leads to a monumental decision in 1707. The Acts of Union unite England and Scotland into a single kingdom, Great Britain. It is not just political, it's imperial. Scottish merchants, soldiers, and thinkers now gain access to English colonies and companies. Together, this new kingdom begins a new chapter of empire, more ambitious, more organized, and increasingly dominant. And so, from fishing ships in the North Atlantic to sugar plantations in the Caribbean, the British Empire is no longer just an idea. It is a machine powered by trade, fueled by labor, and spreading across the seas. But this is only the beginning. In our next segment, we'll watch that machine transform into a juggernaut, crushing rivals, claiming continents, and facing revolutions that threaten to tear it apart. Segment 2. Empires of Trade and War. Dominion expands 1707 to 1815. Part 1. A kingdom united, and empire awakened. The year is 1707. The crowns of England and Scotland have merged, forming the Kingdom of Great Britain. What had been a partnership of rivals becomes a union of ambition. Trade is booming. British ships dominate the seas, and British merchants flood colonial markets. Sugar, tea, tobacco, rum, and cotton fill warehouses back in London, Bristol, and Glasgow. For the first time, the empire truly becomes multinational and hungry. By 1750, islands like Jamaica and Barbados are among the wealthiest colonies in the empire. But that wealth comes at a staggering human cost. Britain's imperial reach now stretches across the Atlantic to North America, to the Caribbean, and further into Africa and Asia. Cities like Liverpool and Bristol become rich from trafficking human beings, religious. Dissenters, particularly Quakers, speak out against slavery. Some begin to question the morality of empire, but for now, those voices are drowned out by the roar of global trade and the drumbeat of war. Mortality rates are high, conditions are brutal, resistance is constant. The British gained the upper hand with the fall of Quebec in 1759. Britain now controls Canada, vast parts of India, and a growing presence in Africa. In India, the British East India Company fights rival European companies and local rulers, gradually asserting its dominance. And in the Caribbean, strategic islands change hands like playing cards. But with every coin of profit comes the shadow of exploitation. Most of this wealth is built on the backs of enslaved Africans, indentured laborers, and colonized peoples. The empire, though gilded in gold, is already beginning to groan under its own contradictions. In 1756, a war breaks out in Europe. But this is no ordinary European war. It is the first truly global conflict. The 7 Years' War, fought between Britain and France, stretches from North America to India, from West Africa to the Philippines. Part 2. The Atlantic Empire and the Weight of Slavery. Nowhere are these contradictions more visible than in the British Caribbean. Plantations grow massive. Monocultural crops, primarily sugar, worked by enslaved Africans, brought in vast numbers from across the continent. Back in Britain, many begin to profit immensely from the trade-wealthy merchants, shipbuilders, insurers, even members of Parliament. And yet, by the mid-18th century, quiet rumblings begin. Part 3. The 7 Years' War. Empire goes global in North America. British and French forces clash in forests and forts. By 1763, Britain emerges victorious. France cedes most of its North American holdings, but victory brings new problems: how to govern these new territories and how to pay for their defense. The costs of empire are beginning to mount. India, the company crowned in the shadows of these wars. The East India Company begins to transform from a trading firm into something much more dangerous, a political and military force. In 1757, Robert Clive leads company troops into the Battle of Plassey with a combination of bribery, betrayal, and force. The company defeats the Nawab of Bengal. It installs a puppet ruler and begins to collect taxes across a vast region. Suddenly, a private corporation is ruling millions of people, and the resentment begins to grow over the next decades. The company expands its influence across the Indian subcontinent. It builds armies. It administers justice. It even mints its own coins. But famine, corruption, and exploitation follow. Indian artisans are undercut by imported British textiles. Traditional elites are sidelined or co-opted. The British are not yet rulers of India, but they are becoming impossible to ignore. Part 5. Revolution in America. After the 7 Years' War, Britain imposes duties on tea, paper, and other goods, attempting to make the colonies pay for their own defense. No taxation without representation becomes their rallying cry. Tensions rise. Protests erupt. In 1775, muskets fire at Lexington and Concord. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Britain's oldest colonies are growing restless. The American colonies, once proud subjects of the Crown, begin to bristle under new taxes and tighter controls. For the first time, Britain faces the loss of a major settler colony, one whose population was largely of British descent. The colony is harsh, strange, and barely survives, but it marks the beginning of a new imperial outpost on the far side of the world. The loss of America shakes assumptions, but it also opens new doors. Without the distraction of the rebellious 13 colonies, attention and resources shift toward India, Africa, and the Pacific. The colonists cry foul. What follows is the American Revolution. It is not just a colonial revolt, it is a crisis of identity. In 1783, after years of war and bloodshed, Britain recognizes American independence. The jewel of the Atlantic Empire is gone. Writers, religious leaders, and formerly enslaved individuals begin to expose the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade. And yet Britain adapts. His words stir the conscience of a growing number of Britons. It is not the end of slavery within the empire that will come decades later, but it is a start. Part 6. A new imperial focus losing the American colonies is not the end, in some ways. It marks a pivot, after years of struggle, debate, and resistance from powerful economic interests. A milestone is reached. Britain doubles down on its other holdings: Canada, the Caribbean, India, and now a new penal colony in Australia, founded in 1788. Convicts are transported from overcrowded British prisons to Botany Bay. A moral pivot is beginning to take shape, though one still riddled with contradictions. At the same time, the British Empire begins reshaping its sense of purpose. A new phase of empire is beginning, one more commercial, more centralized, and increasingly racialized. Part 7. Slavery, morality, and the winds of change even as the empire expands. A storm is gathering back home. By the late 1700s, the abolitionist movement is gaining ground. One voice stands out: Walter Equiano, a former slave who publishes a powerful autobiography detailing the brutality of the Middle Passage and plantation life in Parliament. Men like William Wilberforce take up the cause in 1807. The British Parliament abolishes the transatlantic slave trade. British warships begin patrolling the African coast, intercepting slave vessels. Part 8. Napoleon, war, and imperial high tide. As the 19th century dawns, Britain is once again at war, this time with Napoleon's France. The Napoleonic Wars 1803 to 1815 consume Europe. But for Britain, they are also a reaffirmation of its global reach. The Royal Navy, unmatched at sea, blockades French ports and seizes colonies. By the time Napoleon is defeated at Waterloo in 1815, Britain has not only survived, it has emerged as the dominant imperial power. France is weakened. Spain and Portugal are in decline. The Dutch are rebuilding. The United States is still young and turned inward. Britain stands alone. Atop the imperial ladder, from Cape Town to Calcutta, from the Canadian Maritimes to the new cities of Sydney and Melbourne, British influence is everywhere. But it is not yet the empire of school books and red-coated parades, that empire the Victorian Colossus awaits just beyond the horizon. In the next chapter, we journey into the 19th century, where steamships and railways carry imperial ambition to every corner of the earth. But resistance is growing. Rebellion, famine, and nationalism are stirring beneath the surface. The British Empire, forged in trade and war, has now become a truly global force, but its greatest expansion and its greatest contradictions are still to come. Join us as we enter the age of Queen Victoria and the sun at its zenith. Segment 3. The sun at its zenith. The Victorian Empire, 1815 to 1914, Part 1. The empire inherits the earth. It is 1815. Napoleon is defeated. The Congress of Vienna redraws the map of Europe. But far from the ballroom politics of continental aristocrats, Britain stands supreme on the world stage. The phrase that will soon define the age begins to echo. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Its navy rules the oceans. Its merchants dominate trade routes. Its colonies scattered across every inhabited continent form an archipelago of imperial reach. This is the beginning of the Victorian-era period of immense confidence, ambition, and contradiction. Railways and telegraphs are laid alongside bayonets and gallows. It is the century of both progress and profound injustice. Britain believes it is not just ruling, but civilizing, and yet its empire is built on control, hierarchy, and often violence. Part 2. Queen Victoria and the imperial persona in 1837. A young woman ascends the throne, Victoria. She becomes an empress in every sense, especially after 1876, when she is formally crowned Empress of India. She is 18 years old, shy, and barely known outside the palace walls. But over the next 63 years, Queen Victoria becomes the living symbol of empire. Her name will be stamped on cities, provinces, and even an entire era. Victoria herself never travels far, but her image is everywhere on coins. In Calcutta, statues in Cape Town, portraits in Ottawa. Under her reign, the British Empire reaches its greatest physical extent. Part 3. India crown jewel and colonial crucible. Nowhere is that machinery more visible than in India. For over a century, the British East India Company had governed much of the subcontinent. But in 1857, the system erupts. Indian soldiers sepoys rise in rebellion. The causes are many: disrespect for religion, economic disruption, and racial injustice. What begins as a mutiny quickly becomes a widespread revolt against British rule. The British retaliate with crushing force. India becomes a formal colony of the Crown. The British Raj is born. Villages are burned. Rebels are executed en masse. The brutality on both sides is staggering. In the aftermath, the British government dissolves the East India Company. Now, Britain rules directly with governors, viceroys, and civil servants imposing laws, collecting taxes, and overseeing millions of maps, often with no regard for the people living there. Railroads, schools, and irrigation systems are built, but they serve imperial interests first. For many Indians, British rule brings repression, famine, and the slow erosion of traditional life. Indigenous leaders are overthrown or co-opted. In some regions, resistance is fierce. Control of the Nile, access to gold and diamonds, the vision of a Cape to Cairo railway. But also, a new idea begins to take root: nationalism. Part 4. Africa: The Scramble for a Continent. Boys. Novels tell of brave explorers and noble conquests. Kipling writes of the white man's burden. Imperial pride becomes part of national identity. While India is consolidated, another continent becomes the focus of imperial ambition: Africa. Coal and iron power ships, trains, and telegraphs. Cotton from India and Egypt feeds the textile mills of Manchester. Tea from Assam fills British cups. In the 1880s, European powers Britain, France, Germany, Belgium meet in Berlin to divide the African continent. Carving borders with rulers' markets demand consumers, and the empire provides both. Britain's share is vast: Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa. Nigeria territories seized for strategic and economic gain. Telegraph lines stretch from London to Calcutta, reducing weeks of communication to hours. Shipping ports like Singapore and Hong Kong emerge as vital imperial hubs. Colonial governors impose new laws in Ireland. Demands for home rule grow louder in Africa. Spiritual leaders, warriors, and intellectuals organize uprisings and form early nationalist movements. The Zulu kingdom fights back in South Africa. The modest uprising erupts in Sudan. The Ashanti resist in West Africa. But Britain's military technology, machine guns, gunboats, and rail logistics gives it the upper hand. Back in Britain, imperial adventures are romanticized. But beneath the propaganda lies exploitation, forced labor, cultural erasure, and systemic violence. Part 5. Industry, steam, and the engines of empire. The structures of empire are built to exclude, not empower. What makes this empire different from those of the past? The answer is steam. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 1700s, now fuels imperial expansion like never before. Factories demand raw materials. Railways crisscross India and Africa not for locals, but to extract resources. Empire becomes not just about land, but about systems trade, information, finance, and yet wealth remains concentrated in British hands. Colonies are drained, not developed. Infrastructure is built for extraction, not equality. Part 6. Resistance and reform still. Resistance simmers across the empire. In India, thinkers like Dadabhai Roji and Rabindranath Tagore begin to challenge the moral basis of British rule. Even within Britain, public opinion is not unified. Some begin to question whether empire is truly just or sustainable. The 19th century also sees social reform. The abolition of slavery throughout the empire in 1833, the expansion of voting rights at home, the rise of labor movements. But for most colonized peoples, political power remains elusive. Yet seeds of change are being planted, seeds that will grow in the century to come. Part 7. Settler colonies and the making of Greater Britain. Not all parts of the empire are ruled in the same way. They are seen not as foreign possessions, but extensions of Britain itself. In Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, so-called settler colonies, white British populations grow rapidly. These regions are granted more autonomy, even self-government. In Canada, Indigenous nations face forced assimilation through residential schools and land seizures. Yet, even here, the costs are high. The idea of Greater Britain takes shape, a network of white-majority nations united by culture, language, and allegiance to the crown. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples are dispossessed, displaced, and decimated by disease and violence. Empire brings settlers and soldiers, but also policies of erasure. Within these colonies, a shared Anglo identity begins to form. Though Britain wins, the conflict is costly, brutal, and unpopular. Concentration camps and scorched earth tactics stain the empire's reputation. This network will prove both a strength and a challenge in the years to come. Part 8. Cracks in the facade. As the 19th century nears its end, the British Empire appears invincible. But cracks are beginning to show. In South Africa, tensions with Dutch-descended Boers erupt into the Boer War 1899-1902. In Ireland, unrest grows. Calls for independence gain momentum. The old question of colonial legitimacy returns, and across Asia and Africa, young intellectuals, often educated in British schools, begin to question the empire's moral authority. If liberty is a British value, why is it denied to so many? The empire, now at its largest territorial extent, is also increasingly complex to manage. It has become not just a system of domination, but a web of contradictions between democracy and control, civilization and conquest, freedom and force. As the sun sets on the 19th century, the British Empire stands at its zenith, glorious, sprawling, and admired by many. But storm clouds gather on the horizon. Nationalism, revolution, and global conflict are about to sweep across the world, and the empire will never be the same again. In our final chapter, we trace the fall through to world wars, decolonization, and the slow unspooling of a global order shaped by empire. Segment 4. Twilight and Legacy. The Fall of Empire 1914 Present Part 1. The Empire at War. It is the summer of 1914. Europe is on the brink. A single bullet in Sarajevo triggers a cascade of alliances, and suddenly, the continent is plunged into the First World War for Britain. This is not just a European conflict, it is an imperial one. Indian soldiers fight in France, African troops defend East Africa, and Australians and New Zealanders land on the shores of Gallipoli. The British Empire goes to war with the full force of its global reach, over 1 million colonial. Subjects are called to serve. The war is unlike anything seen before, mechanized, brutal, industrial. By 1918, the Allies emerge victorious. Britain gains new territories, mandates in the Middle East carved from the collapsed Ottoman Empire. But victory comes at a staggering cost. A generation is lost, economies are strained, and for many colonial subjects, the contradiction becomes unbearable. Why fight for freedom abroad when denied it at home? Iraq, Palestine, and Transjordan are brought under British administration. The seeds of decolonization are sown in the trenches. Northern Ireland remains within the United Kingdom, but the scars will last a century. Into our years, restless empire, the 1920s and 30s bring no peace to the empire. White dominions, like Canada, Australia, and South Africa, gain full legislative independence. Marches, boycotts, and civil disobedience ripple across the subcontinent. The British respond with repression. Out the tide is turning in India. Mahatma Gandhi leads a campaign of non-violent resistance against British rule in Ireland. A brutal war of independence leads to partition in 1921. The southern counties become the Irish. A free state elsewhere, nationalist movements are on the rise. In Egypt, Iraq, and Kenya, leaders begin to demand self-rule. British promises of eventual independence ring hollow to many. Meanwhile, the empire is being reimagined as a commonwealth, a partnership of equals. At least on paper, but for the rest of the empire, especially in Africa and Asia, true sovereignty remains a distant dream. Part 3. World War II. The empire tested again then. In 1939, the world is at war once more. Nazi Germany invades Poland. Britain declares war, and once again, the empire mobilizes. Over 5 million troops from colonies and dominions fight for the Allied cause. Africans are conscripted to build roads, carry supplies, and fight in jungles and deserts. Indian soldiers battle in North Africa, Italy, and Burma. Caribbean troops serve in Europe. Singapore, long thought invincible, falls in 1942. British power appears brittle, vulnerable. But the war changes everything. Japan sweeps through British Asia, capturing Hong Kong, Malaya, and Burma. At home, the Blitz devastates cities. Rationing and hardship become daily life. The empire can no longer project unquestioned strength. When the war ends in 1945, Britain emerges victorious but exhausted, indebted, and diminished, and the colonized world is watching closely. Pakistan is born as a separate Muslim majority state. Partition unleashes one of the largest mass migrations in history, over 14 million displaced and up to 1 million dead in communal violence. Part 4. The winds of change. India leads the way of Britain, can lose India. What can it keep? In 1947, after decades of struggle, protest, and negotiation, the unthinkable happens. India becomes independent. The British Raj, once the jewel in the crown, is dismantled. The shock is profound. In the Middle East, Britain relinquishes control of Palestine and Jordan. The imperial edifice begins to crumble. Burma and Sri Lanka gain independence soon after. In Africa, nationalist parties rise in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and beyond. By the late 1950s, the empire is being unspooled in real time. In 1960, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gives his famous speech in South Africa. The wind of change is blowing through this continent. That wind becomes a gale. Part 5. Decolonization, dignity and departure. Throughout the 1950s, 60s and 70s, the British Empire dissolves. Some transitions are peaceful. Ghana, the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence, becomes a beacon of African nationalism in 1957. Malaysia follows suit in 1957. Nigeria in 1960. Kenya in 1963. Elsewhere, the path is more violent. In Rhodesia, a white minority regime resists majority rule for decades. In Kenya, the Mama uprising is met with harsh repression. Thousands are detained in camps. In Cyprus and Aden, guerrilla wars unfold by the 1980s. The once sprawling empire is reduced to a handful of overseas territories: Gibraltar, Bermuda, the Falklands, and others. Still, the tide is irreversible. One by one, flags are lowered, new nations are born. The end comes not with a bang, but a long, drawn-out farewell. Yet, even in departure, Britain seeks to shape the future. The idea: voluntary association, equal partnership. Shared values. Part 6. The Commonwealth. Empire rebranded. As colonies gained independence, Britain promoted a new concept: the Commonwealth of Nations, initially made up of Britain and its former white dominions. It now includes over 50 countries, most of them former colonies, but critics see it as an imperial. Have to go away from Britain to maintain soft power. The Commonwealth gains echo old imperial. Sporting ties. Still, the Commonwealth has real meaning for some. It funds development, promotes cultural exchange, and provides diplomatic forums, and yet, the legacy of empire is never far beneath the surface. Debates rage over colonial history, reparations, stolen artifacts, and systemic racism. Statues fall. Museums reevaluate their collections. Former colonies demand accountability and return of what was taken. Part 7. Memory, reckoning, and the legacy of empire. The British Empire officially no longer exists, but its fingerprints are everywhere. Legal systems, railway networks, and languages reflect colonial legacies. The borders of countries like Iraq, India, and Nigeria bear the marks of hasty imperial decisions. So to do inequalities, global wealth remains uneven, shaped by centuries of extraction. Former colonies face development challenges rooted in histories of exploitation. Migration patterns still reflect imperial pathways. London is now home to millions from South Asia, the Caribbean, and Africa. Communities once ruled from afar, now part of the metropolis. But reckoning is underway. In schools, curricula are changing. In politics, colonial history shapes debates on immigration, identity, and nationalism. The British Empire was a tapestry of contradictions, ideals of civilization woven with threads of domination. The empire, once seen as a source of pride, is now viewed more critically, often with ambivalence, discomfort, or anger. Others emphasize conquest, cultural erasure, and racial hierarchies. Some celebrate infrastructure, global trade, or the spread of English. Both views are true. Its cities, literature, and institutions bear imperial DNA. So to do its challenges. Part 8. The Empire Today. Echoes. Not shadows, so where does that leave us? But its echoes continue to shape the 21st century. Thank you for joining Echoes Through Time. Brexit rekindled old dreams of global Britain, but also exposed deep divisions over identity and history. Today, Britain is no longer a superpower. It is a post-imperial nation still grappling with its past in former colonies. The empire is remembered in complex ways. In India, It is both resented and studied in Kenya, both condemned and questioned. In the Caribbean, calls for reparations grow louder, and yet Britain remains connected to its former empire in language, trade, migration, and memory. The empire may have ended. The British Empire rose in blood, grew through trade, stretched across continents, and fell to the irresistible pull of freedom. It reshaped the world and still does. Its story is not one of simple triumph or tragedy, but of complexity, collision, and consequence.